won $32 million on a Lotto Max ticket, and I never said one word about it to a living soul. 2 nights later, at his own kitchen table, my son asked me when I was finally going to find a place of my own. I put down my fork, said goodnight, and went up to the spare room. By the end of that month, I'd bought the prettiest house on the lake, and not 1 square foot of it was for him. Hello again, my friends, and thank you for sitting with me a while. If this is your first time here, pull up a chair and put the kettle on. Before I get going, do me one small kindness and tell me down in the comments which town or city in Canada you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, from the rock clear out to the island and everywhere in between. And if it moves you at all, a like helps another tired soul find it. Now let me start where I always start, at the beginning, because with me, the beginning is the part that explains all the rest. My name's Audrey, and I was 69 years old the night I understood I'd worn out a welcome I'd never been properly given. I'd been living in my son's house in Oakville for a little over 2 years by then. 2 years, almost to the week, since my husband died on the front steps of our own house one morning in January. A shovel still in his hands and the snow coming down soft and steady, the way it does when it means to stay. He'd gone out before me to clear the path so I wouldn't slip on my way to the car. 41 years married, and the last thing he ever did was worry about my footing. I found him when I came out with my coffee. I won't dwell on that part. I only tell you because you should know what kind of man he was, so you understand the size of the hole he left, and why I said yes to a thing I should have asked far more questions about. After the funeral, my son stood in my kitchen, the one with the yellow tea towels I'd had since the 1980s, with his hands jammed down in his pockets, and he said, "Mom, you can't stay up here by yourself. Come live with us." And I looked at the wallpaper my husband and I had hung the wrong way and laughed about for 30 years, and the window over the sink where I'd watched 4 seasons turn more times than I could count, and I said yes. I was so tired and so frightened of the quiet that I would have agreed to almost anything. I want you to remember that feeling, the way grief makes you small and grateful and easy to move around. It matters later. His house in Oakville was a big new build on a cul-de-sac, 4 bedrooms and a finished basement and a kitchen island the size of my old dining room. His wife had done it all up in grays and whites with those little signs on the wall that tell you to gather and to be grateful as if you might forget. It was a beautiful house. It photographed well. It was also a house where I learned to walk softly and close cupboard doors with 2 fingers so they wouldn't bang. They gave me the spare room at the back, over the garage, with a window that looked straight at the neighbor's vinyl fence. I was asked politely not to move the furniture because my daughter-in-law had a vision for the space and might want it back for staging clients someday. I unpacked 2 suitcases and left the third one zipped in the closet for the better part of a year, which should tell you everything about how settled I felt. The cold came in the way. Cold always comes into these arrangements, which is to say a degree at a time. So gradual you keep reaching for a sweater instead of asking who's been turning down the heat. There was the afternoon my daughter-in-law had her business friends over, mortgage people and stagers, and a woman who sold the staging furniture, and she introduced me by saying, "This is my husband's mother. She's with us for now." For now, as if I were a season that would pass. There was the Sunday they all went out to brunch and simply forgot to tell me, and I came downstairs at 9:30 in my house coat to an empty kitchen and a note under the salt shaker that said, "Back around 1. Coffee's still warm. There was the October evening, around Thanksgiving, after I'd brined the turkey and rolled out 2 pie crusts and washed every dish in that enormous sink, when I heard my daughter-in-law's voice carry down the back stairs. She was talking to my son. "She eats here. She runs the hydro, the heat, the water," she said. And what does she actually put in? I stood at the bottom of those stairs holding a clean roasting pan against my chest, and then I turned around and went back up to my room and shut the door with my two soft fingers, the way I'd taught myself. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was a saint about it. I wasn't. I second-guessed myself morning and night. Was I underfoot? Was I too quiet? Was I too much? Did I hover at the dishwasher because I wanted to help? Or because I didn't know what else to do with my hands? I'd lie in that narrow bed and think about my husband, about how he used to leave a mug of tea on the bathroom windowsill for me every single morning because he knew I couldn't be spoken to before 9. Nobody in that house knew that about me. Nobody had ever bothered to learn it. I thought about the little house in the Quint T Hills, where I'd raised my 2 children and grown my tomatoes and known the name of every dog on the street. And I thought about how I'd let it be sold 8 months after the funeral, because my son said, gently, reasonably, "You're not going back there alone, Mom, and an empty house just bleeds money." And I had no fight in me, so I let it go. The money from that sale, what there was of it, sat in a GIC at the credit union, comfortable, but nothing remarkable. Enough to live careful, not enough to do anything bold. I tell you that so the rest of it makes sense. The ticket was an accident, more or less. I'd had a doctor's appointment on a Thursday in February. Nothing serious, just the regular tune-up they give you at my age. And on the way home, I stopped at the gas station off the highway for a tin of mints. The lottery terminal was right there by the till, blinking away, and I don't know what got into me. I'd bought maybe a dozen tickets in my whole life. My husband always said the lottery was a tax on people who couldn't do math, and he wasn't wrong, but he was also gone. And I was standing there in a borrowed life with mint on my breath. So I bought the one ticket on a quick pick and shoved it in my coat pocket and forgot about it for 4 days. I found out on a Monday morning. I was alone at the kitchen island with the radio low and a cup of instant, and I pulled the crumpled ticket out of my coat to throw it away and thought I might as well check it on my phone first. I read the numbers. Then I read them again with my reading glasses on. Then I went and stood at the patio doors and looked out at the snow on the deck for a long, long time, and I read them a third time. $32 million. And here's the thing about this country that I want every one of you to hear, especially the young ones, that money was mine. All of it free and clear, not a nickel owed to the taxman, because that's how it works here. $32 million tax-free, sitting on a slip of paper in my shaking hand. I did not make a sound. I folded that ticket once and then again, and I went upstairs and tucked it inside the cover of my husband's old fishing log, the leather one he'd kept since before we married, where he wrote down every lake and every fish and every cold morning. Nobody in that house would ever open that book. Nobody ever had. And I said nothing. Not to my son, not to my daughter-in-law, not to my own daughter out in Vancouver, who I trusted more than anyone alive. Not yet. I wanted to hold it close and feel it become real before anyone else could touch it. That was a Monday in February. The dinner was the next Sunday. It was an ordinary night. That's the part I can't get past even now. Roast chicken, rice from a box, a bag of frozen peas. My grandson, 11, had his game open under the table. My granddaughter, 14, was pushing food around her plate and sulking about something a girl at school had said. My son was eating fast and looking at nothing, the way he does when work has hollowed him out. My daughter-in-law was telling a story about a closing that had nearly fallen apart on the Friday. I was passing the dish of peas when my son said it, and he didn't even look up from his plate. "Mom," he said, "what's the actual plan here? Like, when are you thinking of getting your own place? I want to be honest with you about why that one landed the way it did. It wasn't cruel. If he'd been cruel, I could have been angry, and anger is easy. Anger gives you something to push against. He just sounded tired. He sounded like a man saying a thing he'd been turning over in his head for a long time and had finally decided to set down on the table between the chicken and the peas. The kitchen went quiet. My daughter-in-law found something very interesting on her own plate. My grandson put his game face down on his knee. My granddaughter stopped chewing. I looked at my son. He had gray coming in at his temples now, the exact way his father had, and he was looking at me the way you look at a stack of paperwork you keep meaning to deal with. He was 43 years old. I had carried him and fed him and sat up with him through croup and broken hearts and one terrible winter when he was 19, and now he wanted to know what my plan was. I set the dish down. I folded my napkin in half and laid it beside my plate, the way my mother taught me, and I stood up. "Good night, all," I said. That was it. I didn't slam anything. I didn't cry. I went up the back stairs to my room with the window that faced the fence, and I put on my coat, and then I went out onto the deck and stood in the cold. It was bitter out there, 15 below with the wind, and the snow on the railing had that blue cast it gets at night. I didn't have my boots on, just my house slippers, and I stood in 3 inches of fresh snow and didn't feel a thing. My husband used to say I was built like a lighthouse keeper's daughter, all stone and no fuss, steady in any weather. He meant it kindly. And I had spent most of 70 years keeping myself upright and uncomplaining. But standing out there in the dark with the cold soaking up through my slippers, I let the whole 2 years come down on me at once. For now, the forgotten brunch, the hydro and the heat and the water, the roasting pan against my chest. And now my own boy asking me what my plan was, as if I were a tenant who'd missed the rent. And I'll tell you what came to me, standing there. Nobody had ever once said congratulations. Not for the wedding anniversary that had come and gone without a card. Not for anything. I had become, in that house, a problem to be managed and a cost to be tallied. And I had $32 million folded into a dead man's fishing log, and not a single person at that table knew it. I went back inside before my feet froze, and I sat on the edge of that narrow bed, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than tired. I felt clear. I started the next morning, careful and quiet. I called a lawyer, not anybody connected to my son or his wife, a woman 2 towns over who handled estates and trusts and treated me like I had good sense. I called a financial advisor she trusted. I claimed the prize the proper way, no fanfare, and I learned the things you learn fast when you have that kind of money, and the whole world will want a piece of you. Put the ticket somewhere safe. Sign nothing in a hurry. Don't tell people the number. Set up a trust, write a will, decide on purpose where every dollar goes before anyone can decide it for you. My lawyer set up a trust to hold what I was about to do, so my name wouldn't be sitting out in the open on a deed for the whole world to read. I felt, for the first time in a very long while, like a woman with a tiller in her hands, instead of a woman being carried by the current. And then I went looking for a house. Quietly. I'd hired an agent who worked well out of my daughter-in-law's territory, a kind woman who never once asked a question I didn't want to answer. I knew where I wanted to be before I knew which house. I wanted to go home to the county, Prince Edward County, down on the lake, the country I'd come up in as a girl, with its long flat fields and its sandbanks and its old farmhouses with deep front porches. There was one place the agent had sent me that I couldn't stop thinking about. A century farmhouse outside Wellington, set back off the road on a piece of land with old maples and a barn, and a long view down to the water. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom on the east side that caught the morning, good bones, the kind of porch you could die happy on. The asking was a touch over $1 million. In Oakville, that buys you a townhouse and a parking fight. Out there, it bought me the rest of my life. Now here's where it gets interesting. And here's where my daughter-in-law showed me exactly who she was. She started to notice things. I'd been driving out to appointments, to the lawyer, to the bank, to the county. And I'm not a good liar, so I just said I had errands and paperwork. She noticed the errands. She noticed a folder I'd brought home, a thin one, the kind with a metal clasp that I'd taken to keeping in my room. I knew she'd noticed it because one afternoon I came back, and that folder, which I had left squared up against the lamp, was sitting a good inch to the left of where I'd put it. And the little dollar store combination lock I'd looped through the clasp had been turned over and set back down facing the wrong way. Somebody had picked it up and tried it and put it back, and they hadn't been careful because it had never once occurred to them that I was a person who would notice. I sat on that bed and looked at the folder for a long time. Then I drove to the print shop in the plaza and made certified copies of everything in it and had them couriered to my lawyer for safekeeping, and I bought a proper lockbox the next day. And then, because something in me had hardened in a way I didn't fight, I drove out to a quiet street in the county I'd been thinking about, and I told my agent yes, full asking, cash, through the trust, clean and fast, the way my lawyer said to do it. The offer went in on a Wednesday. They accepted by supper time. 30-day close. I stood in the parking lot of the little grocery in Wellington with the wind off the lake going through my coat, and I said the word out loud to nobody, mine. I hadn't had a thing that was truly mine since the day I let them sell the house in the hills. Back in Oakville, I kept being the quiet woman at the back of the house. I made the Sunday chicken. I drove my granddaughter to her art class on Tuesdays and didn't say a word about the man at the credit union who now called me Mrs. and offered me a chair. But you can't keep a real estate deal secret forever in this country because land records are public, and my daughter-in-law was a mortgage broker, and that world is small and chatty. She had, I would later learn, set an alert on my name with one of her property services, and when that turned up nothing because the trust held the title, she'd gone digging through her contacts. Somebody in a title office who knew somebody who knew her mentioned a tidy cash close out in the county, an older woman, a trust nobody recognized. She put it together fast. She was always quick that way. She came to my room on a Saturday morning. She didn't knock. I was at the little desk by the window in my reading glasses and the cardigan my son had given me 3 Christmases back, and the door just opened, and she stood in the middle of the room with her arms crossed. "You bought a house," she said. I turned around in the chair. "I've been looking for a place of my own," I said. Wasn't that the idea? A farmhouse in the county. Over $1 million, cash, through a trust. She said the word trust like it was a thing I'd stolen. "Where did the money come from?" "I have savings," I said. "We went through your finances after the estate settled. You don't have farmhouse money, not in this market." There it was again, that we, the way she said it, as casual as the weather, as if my bank account were just another household account she had the run of. "Things change," I said. Her eyes went narrow, and I watched her do the arithmetic right there in front of me, the way you can watch a slot machine spin. "Did somebody leave you something? An account we didn't know about?" I took off my reading glasses and folded them and set them on the desk. "Is there a reason," I said, "that you feel entitled to a line-by-line accounting of my personal money?" The temperature in that room dropped a good 10 degrees. She let the quiet sit, the way people do when they're deciding which lever to pull next. And then she pulled the only one she had. "We took you in," she said, "when you had nowhere else to go. After everything, I think we deserve a little honesty. We took you in." I had cooked their dinners and folded their towels and driven their children and made myself the size of a guest in their house for 2 years. And in her ledger it read, "We took her in." I looked at her, and I will tell you, my friends, I have never in my life felt steadier. "You've been very generous," I said, and I meant it as the knife it was. "I'll be out of your way inside the month." She didn't leave. She stood there, and her voice came down lower and harder. "If you've come into real money and something happens to you, do you have any idea what that does to this family? To my husband? There are tax implications. There are estate complications. You can't just hide assets, Audrey. I have a lawyer," I said, turning back to my desk, "and a financial advisor, and a will, and a trust. Everything is exactly where I want it. There's nothing hidden, and there's nothing for you to worry about." I picked my pen back up. "Thank you for checking on me." She left, and she pulled the door hard enough that the lamp wobbled. And I sat there with my hands flat on the desk so she wouldn't have the satisfaction of hearing them shake, because they were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back 2 years of things I'd swallowed. My son came up that night. He sat on the edge of my bed, that narrow guest bed, with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at his own hands the way he did when he was small and had broken something. "She's pretty upset," he said. "I noticed," I said. "Mom is there." He stopped. "Look, I know I said something dumb at dinner. I could have said it better. I'm sorry. But she says you've been cagey, and now there's a house, and she's worried." Worried. That was the word he chose. I looked at my boy, and I thought about the 4-year-old who'd cried himself sick when our old dog died, and the 19-year-old who'd phoned home, collect from his dorm, just to hear me say it would be all right, and the man on the edge of my bed who couldn't quite meet my eye. "You don't need to worry about me," I said. "I'm going to be just fine." He waited for more. There wasn't any more. After a minute, he nodded and went back downstairs, and I heard the low rise and fall of the two of them talking through the wall for a long time. I closed 3 weeks later. I'd had my husband's things in a storage locker the whole 2 years. The cedar strip canoe he built one winter with his own hands, his rocking chair, the boxes of books and quilts, and the good dishes that were mine before any of them were born, and I hired a truck to bring them down to the county. On the morning I left, I didn't make a speech. I'd said everything I needed to say. I left a card on the kitchen island, 2 lines in my own hand. "Thank you for the room. I'll be in touch when there's something kind to say." And I drove east into the morning sun with a moving truck behind me, and I did not look in the rearview mirror until Oakville was well behind me. The house took to me right away, the way a good house will. The first morning I sat in that east-facing sunroom with the light coming up over the maples and a cup of real coffee, no instant ever again. And I thought my husband would have been absolutely unbearable about how right he'd been, all those years about a room that catches the morning. I told him so out loud. The house didn't mind. I put his rocking chair in the corner by the window, where it looked like it had sat for 100 years. I hung his fishing log on a little shelf by the back door. I bought a great long harvest table from an auction up the road, the kind you can roll out pastry on and host 8 people at and leave a jigsaw puzzle spread on for a week. I planted a garden that the man next door called, with great maritime understatement, a fair bit of ambition. He was a retired teacher, a widower, a patient grower of things. And he turned up that first Saturday with a flat of tomato seedlings and stayed half the morning talking about soil and the deer that come up from the woods at dusk. We've made a habit of it. Saturday mornings, the odd dinner. He's good company in the quiet way that suits me. And I'll save you the trouble of asking in the comments, no, it isn't like that. And I'm just fine, thank you. My sister drove up from Kingston for a weekend in the spring and brought me a dozen butter tarts from a place she swears by, and we sat on the porch both evenings until the cold came down off the water. "You did it," she said the second night. "I did it," I said. My daughter flew in from Vancouver in June. She walked through every room slowly, the way she used to walk through a room as a girl, when she'd been given something she'd wanted too badly to ask for. And she sat down in the sunroom and looked out at the garden and said, "Mom, this house is you." And I thought, there it is, the only review I've ever needed. She asked me about the money, but not the way the other one had. She didn't ask the number, and she didn't ask what it meant for her. She asked if I was all right, and if the people I'd hired were people I could trust. I told her yes, completely, and she let out a long breath and said, "Then that's all I need to hear." I raised that girl right. I take very little credit for much in this life, but I'll take that. As for my son, I'll tell this part as plainly as I've told the rest. We met for coffee in the county a few weeks after I moved, and again a month after that. They were careful, those visits. We were both learning how to talk without 2 years of unsaid things crowding the table. It is harder work than people think, and we are both still bad at it. But we are trying, and trying is the start of something. I learned over that summer that his wife had taken my situation to 2 different lawyers to see if my decisions could be challenged. Both told her there was nothing to challenge. The will held, the trust held. Everything I'd done was clean and proper and mine. It cost her a good deal of money and her dignity. Besides, and it got her exactly nowhere. They separated in the fall, about 6 months after I left. I want to be clear with you that I felt no joy in that. She is the mother of my grandchildren and a family. Coming apart is never something I'd wish on anyone, but I also won't pretend it was my doing. People's choices have weight, and they pile up, and one day the floor gives. My grandchildren came down to the county for the first time in July. I was nervous as a girl before it, baking too much. But my granddaughter went straight to the kitchen window over the garden and announced she approved. And by the second visit, she was out there with me at 7 in the morning, pinching back the tomatoes and asking how I knew when a thing was ready. My grandson found his grandfather's canoe in the barn and went very quiet, and then asked if it really floated, and if his grandfather had really built it, and could he learn. We put it in the water that August. He's got his great-grandfather's patience for the thing. That boy, the kind of stillness you can't teach. Some things travel in straight lines, and some things circle back around when you stopped watching for them. So here I am, my friends. I have a house full of morning light and good dirt under my fingernails, and a canoe in the bay, and grandchildren who come because they want to, not because there's chicken on the table. I built something at 70 that feels finally entirely like me. People ask me sometimes whether I regret how it all went, whether I should have just told them about the money and shared it out and kept the peace. I don't, and I won't. And here's the only piece of advice I'll leave you with, because I'm not one for sermons. The money didn't give me my life back. The money was just a set of car keys. The thing that gave me my life back happened at a kitchen table on an ordinary Sunday, when I folded my napkin and stood up and decided that being tolerated was no longer a price I was willing to pay for a roof. You are not too old, whatever your number is, and it is never as late as they've let you believe. Don't tell anyone your number. Keep your own counsel. And when somebody asks you what your plan is, in that tired little voice, you're allowed to stand up from the table and go build one. So tell me down in the comments, wherever you are out there in this big, cold, beautiful country, what would you have done if it had been you passing the peas that night? I truly want to know, and if any of this found you in a hard season, pass it along to someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for spending this hour with me. It means more than I can rightly say. I've thought a great deal about why it all unfolded the way it did, and I keep landing on the same plain truth. Nothing in my story happened by accident. Every ending I got was the harvest of a seed somebody planted, mine included. When I let them sell the little house in the hills without a fight, I taught a household that my wishes could be moved around like furniture. When my daughter-in-law decided a person's worth was a column of figures, the hydro and the heat and the groceries, she was already on the road to a marriage that couldn't hold. Because you cannot keep love in a house where you've turned everyone into a balance sheet. And when my son asked me what my plan was in that tired little voice, he was simply saying out loud what the silence had been saying for 2 years. Causes have consequences. They don't shout. They just arrive. What pulled me through wasn't the 32 million. Money only widens the doors that are already in front of you. 3 quieter things did the actual work, and I'd hand them to you if I could. The first is keeping your own decency even when you've been treated poorly. I never lied about the money. I never schemed against anyone. I made my own choices and let them stand on their own. When her lawyers came looking, there was nothing to find, because I'd done it all clean. A clear conscience is the only fortune nobody can sue you for. The second is good sense, the plain kind. I noticed the folder moved an inch to the left. I hired people who answered to me and not to anyone in that family. I learned the rules before I signed a single thing, and I never once told a soul the number. Looking carefully and thinking ahead isn't suspicion. It's respect for yourself. The world doesn't protect the trusting. It protects the prepared. And the third is backbone, which at my age I'd half forgotten I had. It would have been easier to stay small in that back room and keep the peace and die quietly grateful for a roof. Standing up from that table in my slippers and walking out into the snow cost me more than the house did. But that was the moment everything turned. Not the lottery, the standing up. So if you take one thing from an old woman with dirt under her nails and a canoe in the bay, let it be this. Stay honest when it would be easier not to. Keep your eyes open and your plans your own. And when the time comes to choose between being comfortable and being yourself, find the nerve to choose yourself. You're never too old to start, and it's never as late as they've quietly let you believe.